language does not translate into child psychological understanding. Because if you say to an adult, a child for instance, when the traffic is clear, walk directly across the road, very often they will go across a 4-arm junction from corner to corner, believing they're doing the right thing. They're goal-oriented, unfortunately. And there's a number of other examples I could use. Unfortunately, the Green Cross Code was developed in the 1950s. It's a subsequent daughter or son of the curb drop, the old army rule of the 1950s. But our understanding of child psychology and learning and all these things has moved massively in that time. The Green Cross Code, unfortunately, is not moved with the time. We know that language does not equate to behaviour. Children can say anything they like, but they won't do the same, unfortunately. And I'll show you that later. Because children learn complex tasks through practical experience. Can you think of a task that's more complex than crossing the road for a young child? I cannot. And at the end of the day, if you were to teach a child how to ride a bike, would you say to them first, get on the seat, then lift your foot on the pedal? No, of course you wouldn't. You give them a bike, and you get them on the bike with the stabiliser, and you start to teach them the practical application of riding the bike. The same with swimming. It's a practical activity. You wouldn't teach them in the classroom. So why would we do this in the classroom? This underpins the importance of practical education with young children. We also knew, through the research that we talked about earlier, that young children were capable of learning these skills at a very early age. It was suggested as early as 4 or 5 years of age that children could start to acquire the skills that they needed, the coping strategies they actually needed to deal with the environment in which we placed them. So, what were our programme objectives? We knew we needed to improve children's skills at the earliest opportunity. Because as much as we'd like to say to mums and dads, for goodness sake, take your children out of this environment, in the real world that was not going to happen. So if there was any possibility of actually improving children's coping strategies or ability to deal with these issues, we needed to do that very quickly. We also needed to raise parents' awareness of the child's vulnerability, which we believe to be a very important issue. Parents don't naturally expose their children to danger. It's just that as adults, we ourselves are so used to coping with this environment, and we forget how tender in mind that a child is. And unfortunately, this led us, certainly some of the parents, many of the parents, this wasn't just small incidents. I could drive through any estate and where I lived in the locality, and I would see very, very young children within metres of fast-moving traffic. And, as a road safety professional myself, it frightened the life out of me. But parents themselves didn't realise it because children are very sophisticated. They can do all sorts of tasks at very early ages, which somehow may fool the parent, I have no better explanation than that, into believing they can cope with dealing with traffic, which is a very different entity altogether. It's different programming a video or a CD or whatever the case is. As many young children would do at 4 or 5 years of age, it's different going down the road for a loaf of bread. Completely different set of skills required. We need an effective means of communicating with parents, and we need to develop a resource to encourage them to participate in this process, this skills building process that I've talked about. So what do? We thought to ourselves, we're going to have to communicate with parents in a way that's going to make them pick up this communication and not want to put it down. In other words, make it so relevant to them, they couldn't afford to put it down. But whatever we did had to be evidence-based. We know it's a common factor these days, common phrase, evidence-based, it rolls off the tongue. But 10 years ago, it was less so, but we knew that, all the research had told us that this had to be an integral feature of what we were developing. It had to include the casualty causation factors, the child development learning theories, we had to attest to them, and of course the real-world experience that we gained. All of those factors went into developing this programme. It's titled Child Pedestrian Assessments at the top. I'll explain exactly what that is now. I don't expect you to be able to read that, but I'll just quickly point out 2 or 3 factors. Those 8 lines that come down here, each one of those is a behavioural component involved in a child's casualty causation. Something that the child does not possess is likely to lead them to become involved, or more likely to lead them to become involved in a casualty. I'm just going to talk about three of these because one's psychological and it's critical. And in many pedestrian training schemes, it is not dealt with in any way, shape or form. And it's this one here. The second one, child understood that they made a mistake near the road, they could be hurt. Through pedestrian training schemes, what we tend to do is we teach children a set of skills, or whatever that might be. But where is the motivation to use those skills? You can teach a child by rote to do something. You can repetitively take them to the roadside and say, if this, then that, if that, then this, if you know what I mean. But that's purely observed behaviour. They'll do it while you're there. But what makes them do it when you're gone? What makes them do it when they're distracted by X, Y, or Z in the streets, when they're playing in their own real world, away from our observations, where they're on a task, they're on a test, so they will do that time and time again in front of you. That point there's something that some research, I think was by Sussex University, and it suggested that children go through a developmental phase, and very early in their life, they're what is called damage-oriented. In other words, if they are hurt in any way, shape or form, they blame the thing that causes the damage to them. And we, as parents or adults, tend to reinforce this amongst children. For instance, if a child bangs the head on a sideboard, a mum or dad will say, oh, naughty sideboard, and rub the head, if you know what I mean. Or if they bang the knee in the playground, naughty play, whatever it might be. But if you take a 5-year-old child out and you say to them at the roadside, if you were to walk out in front of this car now, whose fault would it be? And if that car hit you, what would be the cause of that? Whose fault would that be? And I swear to you, and try this yourself if you have 5-year-olds with access to the scene, 9 out of 10 of them will blame the car. Because developmentally, at that stage of their life, they go through this, they are entrenched in this damage-oriented perspective. It's a psychological, developmental issue amongst all children, male, female, any culture, in terms of that. And the point is, they will actually blame the thing that causes the damage. And this is a transitory phase they go through. And not until the age, it is hypothesised, that 13 or 14 years of age are all children at what they call an error-avoidant perspective. In other words, they blame the errors that led to the incident. And this is a gradual process that children go through. But at 5 years of age, virtually all children, without exception, if you take them out and say, if you walk out into that road and a car hits you, whose fault is that? They would say the car, time and time again. And this perpetuates through a child's life until about 9 or 10 years of age, 50-50. 50% of children are damage avoidant, 50% are error avoidant, depending on the development in terms of that. But without recognising, to get to the point of this particular psychological point, if a child does not recognise that their behaviour is contributing towards the outcome, why are they motivated to change that behaviour? Of course they're not. How can they be? Because there's no reason for them to do so. It's not their fault in the first place. It's the car that hit them. They didn't do anything wrong, they were just crossing the road. So what we have to do, what we believe we need to do in our pedestrian training, which follows on from these pedestrian assessments incidentally, is to deal with this damage and error avoidance. And I would pray to anybody who's involved